One French morning, shower rain drifts across the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer like a curtain. Seagulls circle over the roofs. They keep an eye out for fish waste. Huge trucks humming out of the grounds of the largest fishing port in France. You will have to travel hundreds of miles before you get to your destination. Fresh fish from Boulogne-sur-Mer is particularly popular in Italy and Spain. British fish, many British would say, because much of the fish that lands in Boulogne-sur-Mer is caught in the territorial waters of Great Britain. For decades, French, Spanish, Dutch and other fishing boats from member countries of the EU had access to British territorial waters. The European Union wants it to stay that way after Brexit. But British fishermen voted for Brexit by a large majority in June 2016. The Brexiteers take back control can be translated into our waters, our fish. The government in London no longer wants to tolerate fishing from EU member states on their coasts without further ado. In the future, Great Britain should be able to determine who is allowed to fish when and how much in its waters every year. David Frost, the British head of delegation, repeats the reason for this over and over again. We are an independent coastal state. But what does independence mean after 40 years of membership in the EU? It is not clear how it could be implemented at all, and if so, at what price. The question remains unanswered more than 4 years after the Brexit referendum. Why this is so can be seen on the subject of fishing. It only accounts for around 1% of the economic output in both the EU and the UK. But when it comes to fishing, the otherwise rather diffuse concept of the sovereign nation suddenly becomes very concrete. Who can fish in UK waters? UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, one of the central figures of the Brexiteers in 2016, likes to talk about the extraordinarily rich fishing grounds in the UK, which the British can freely dispose of after Brexit. He suggests that others, namely the continental Europeans, exploited the fishing grounds without paying a fair price. It is the classic populist argumentation. You are taking advantage of us, and now it's over. Europe is just as tough as the British government on this issue. Above all, French President Emmanuel Macron. Very early on, he declared fishing a fundamental economic interest for France that we shall defend. Okay, once again, a fundamental economic interest for France that we shall defend. The Brussels negotiators finally put the issue high on the agenda. So how can fish under what conditions be fished in UK waters? If the question is left unanswered, the entire negotiations could fail. Then there is a threat of a Brexit without an agreement with incalculable consequences. In Boulogne-sur-Mer, Georges Thomas, a short, plump man, comes to the office of the Association of Fish Processing Companies to do some paperwork one day. He has been in the fishing business since 1983, and since 1993 he has had his own fish processing company called Phoenix Distribution. It's a small company with just 7 employees. Georges Thomas lived in Great Britain for a number of years. Same here, by the way, for those few trolls who still believe I've never been to the UK. But Georges Thomas has been married to a British woman for 40 years. I have not. So Georges Thomas knows the emotional state of both nations. Sometimes they seem downright incompatible to him. He believes Brexit is a late consequence of the social and economic devastation wrought by the harsh neoliberal policies of Margaret Thatcher's era. The misery that has since spread, particularly in the north of England, is a fertile ground for the populists. And that applies especially to fishermen. No British government has invested in the fishing industry in recent years, says Thomas. Non-government. That sparked growing anger among fishermen. Then the Brexiteers came and diverted the anger of fishermen to Europe. That sounds logical. And yet Brexit came as a surprise to Georges Thomas. with all the anger, with all the propaganda, with all the lies, in the end, the self-interest should have prevailed. It was so clearly recognizable. The British have a lot of fish, but they eat little fish. So they have to export it. Where? To continental Europe, of course. That's what Georges Thomas says, and his face shows a strange mixture of horror and pleasure when he was interviewed by the German newspaper Zeit at that moment. What is true about fish and what is true of all other British goods and products? The European single market is the main export market for the British industry. Almost half of British exports go to the EU, while only 10% of European exports go to the UK. And I really used a high number there. It's at the moment closer to 6%. In the event of a Brexit without an agreement, a so-called crash out, it would be clear who would be more damaged. The UK. Of course, Europe would be damaged too. And the European Union would be damaged too. But the biggest harm will come to the UK, even if those hardcore Brexiteers, for them, it's quite a religion for them now, Brexit, but they don't want to believe it. But that's just mere facts. And in the end, it won't matter. Tomorrow you will have a video from me about all the damage it will do to the German economy. And yes, there will be damage to the German economy. So both sides will suffer. Although since the beginning of the Brexit negotiations, both sides have emphasized that they have the greatest interest in an agreement and overall in a prosperous future relationship, there have been few tangible results so far. And time is running out now. After the British government let the deadline for a possible extension for the negotiations expire, an agreement has to be in place by October 31st at the latest. After that, any deal still has to be ratified by all national parliaments of the 27 EU member states and even some regional parliaments. And don't forget the British side there. Only then could there be a regulated Brexit on January 1st. Only then would the whole thing go relatively quietly. Neither the producers nor the consumers will too harshly notice that the third largest economy in Europe has left the EU. Of course, even with a deal, there will be traffic jams in the beginning and stuff like that. There will be controls and stuff like that, but nothing as harmful as a no deal. But next to nothing is progressing. And the question arises, why? The European Union offers the UK a so-called triple zero. Zero tariffs, zero quotas, zero dumping. This is, as David McAllister, chairman of the Brexit Commission of the European Parliament, puts it, an excellent offer. The British see it differently, of course. The EU, says a British negotiator, wants to leave everything as it is. It wants everything to stay as it is. Just as if we hadn't left the EU, but we've now decided to leave. Which is weird because they left on February 1st. But that's exactly the crux of the matter. The British must feel that their country is no longer a member of the Union, and it must bring them advantages and relief. How else could such a serious step as Brexit be justified? But there will hardly be a noticeable difference if Great Britain accepts the terms of the EU. Brussels wants to grant the triple zero only if Great Britain submits the standards of the Union in labour, environmental, social and competition law. Otherwise, there is a risk of unfair competition from Brussels' point of view. If British companies do not have to adhere to the requirements from Brussels and still be able to export to the EU without tariffs, that would amount to dumping. The EU wants to prevent that. The British government has repeatedly asserted that it will not go to dumping, but little is given to the promise as long as it is not part of an agreement. There is lack of truth on both sides. Why, asks a British expert negotiating the subject of fisheries in Brussels, does the EU absolutely want to make fishing grounds an essential part of a free trade agreement? Fishing grounds are part of a country's national resources, he says. Indeed, from an international law perspective, the British, as an independent coastal state, are not obliged to allow foreign fishing boats access to their waters. And it is quite unusual for trade agreements and fisheries to be linked. But in Brussels they insist and refer to the political declaration that both parties signed in October 2019. This document aims to set the framework for future relationship. The declaration says that both parties are working on a new fisheries agreement as part of the comprehensive economic partnership. It is no secret that this formulation came about under pressure from the EU. But he still signed it. Since it cannot force access to the fishing grounds, it wants to take advantage of the fact that Great Britain is very dependent on favorable trade relations with the EU. And the EU believes it has the longer lever. Britain may have good objective reasons for keeping fisheries out of the free trade agreement, but there are a number of arguments against it, both political and atmospheric. Boris Johnson's government signed the political declaration. While it is not a legally binding document, it is a mutual agreement. If the UK government were to stick to its position and not negotiate the fisheries under the economic partnership, it would violate this agreement. They exposed themselves to the suspicion that, contrary to their assertions, it did not want to strive for a comprehensive agreement, but rather to negotiate sector by sector. So, how little worth is Johnson's signature? You can do that, says Bert Lange, chairman of the EU Parliament's Trade Committee, but then the British government would have to say, we are stepping back from the political declaration completely. And that's what Boris Johnson did, for everyone's surprise. Before the latest round of Brexit negotiations in early September, he declared the political declarations to be irrelevant. He who signed this essential agreement less than 6 months earlier. The loss of confidence is immense, not only in Prime Minister Boris Johnson, but also in the ability of the UK as a constitutional state to adhere to the fundamental rule of law principle pacta sunt servanda. That's Latin for contracts must be kept. How can you trust someone whose signature is worth so little? It is possible that the British government has long since come to terms with a crash out. If it can't prove to their voters that Brexit is worth it, it has to look for someone to blame. The only question that remains is, who will be able to accuse whom of destructive stubbornness more convincingly? London, Brussels, or Brussels, London? In the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer, the development is viewed with growing horror. The fishing industry gives jobs to 5,000 people, and the city has around 60,000 inhabitants. Émeric Chézanne of the Syndicat Général des Mareyeurs, the Association of Fish Processing Companies, estimates that if the UK crashed out, the local fish industry would lose up to 30% of its turnover. Attempts are being made to prepare for this by improving the port services, for example to attract more Irish or Dutch fishing boats to Boulogne-sur-Mer. Months ago, the French government had an old building in the port renovated and trained and assigned custom officers. Should there be a Brexit without an agreement, the fish from Great Britain would have to be checked and cleared through customs in Boulogne-sur-Mer. So they are prepared for the worst. Georges Thomas, who is at home in the French and British worlds, sums up the mood among French fishermen. They are angry, and they say to the British, if we can no longer fish here, you can fish, but you won't sell on our market. And if you are now interested in more about European or global politics, there's the button to subscribe to my channel. Then you'll know when I publish another video. And if you want to see something right now, YouTube has chosen another of my videos right here for you in the end screen. I'll see you in my next video. Click and enjoy. Viel Spaß!